Hello everyone and welcome to the video guide walkthrough for Izax, the fifth and last boss in the Gods from the Machine operation. My goal with this video is to provide all the information you need to defeat this boss in story mode and to go over all of the mechanics. As you'll see, and as you may already know if you've fought this boss before, there are a lot of phases, there are a lot of mechanics, some of which you have to pay really close attention to and some you don't. So don't worry about it. We're going to go through it and try to make it as concise as possible. I do suggest, however, that you use the navigation down below in the comments where you can click to whichever section you'd like to brush up on. For folks that are new to this fight, I'd particularly recommend really understanding the mechanics to Phase 2. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so here's a screenshot of the group just before we begin the encounter. The first thing to note is that the way that you begin this encounter is a little different. You click the little button there, the temporary ability bar, the red button, which will start a 5-second cast, at the conclusion of which the boss will activate. Anybody can click this button and start the fight, so it's important to make sure that anybody in here that's new to the fight knows not to click the button until you've ready checked and explained the fight and talked about strategy and you're ready to go. You'll also note, and we'll show kind of a diagram here in a minute, but you'll notice there's this blue shield. You can't leave the shield. If you do, you'll get sucked back in. You'll note throughout the fight, Izax has a number of different phases and mechanics that involve him being shielded in some way. This is the only instance where you're trapped inside the shield. Every other instance will be trying to break through the shield to deal damage to Izax. Okay, so now let's talk about Phase 1. Phase 1 will be set entirely inside of this shield. Okay, so in case this is helpful for everyone, here's kind of a layout. We're going to talk about each phase in this way to hopefully make it help explain the pieces that are going on, and then we'll look at it in real time, and hopefully that'll help things make more sense. Even though, in all honesty, it's tough for this fight to make a whole lot of sense till you've run it a few times, but hopefully this will help. So in Phase 1, we're stuck inside this big blue shield. There's a few mechanics we need to worry about. First, kind of going from top to bottom here, we start the encounter. That's the red button that you click to start the fight. The deflector shield is that big blue shield. You can't leave that shield. You'll be just basically pulled right back inside of it. So you're trapped in the relatively small area. The boss has a cast fire, return fire that you don't really need to worry about. Another thing you'll note, and this will be easier to identify when we see it in real time, but the germicidal radiation field is kind of a yellow, orangish AoE field right in front of the boss. You don't want to stand in it or you'll take damage, and you'll take a stacking debuff that causes you to take more and more damage. In story mode, you never really want to get inside this box, even though it's going to seem like you need to in order to be in range. Izax's hitbox is massive, so you can stand just outside of it if you're a melee DPS, like is noted on the map here, and you'll still be able to hit him. The only time you ever need to step into that field is on higher difficulties. The tank may need to step in there to deal with the boss's swipe mechanic, but in story mode, you don't need to worry about it. From a positioning perspective, that is what the rest is all this mechanic, this phase really is all about. So the boss has a swipe cleave that occupies about 2/3 of that area, and it will either be on the left side or the right side, whereas it's oriented here, the top side or the bottom. And so we want the tank to take that cleave. We don't want anyone else to take the cleave. And so everybody else should be stacked just outside that cleave AoE. We do not want anyone up against the wall, as I'll explain in a moment. And so ideally you want people along these patterns so that the tank is about equidistant. He's kind of in the middle of the cleave range. And then all the healers and DPS are set up just outside of it so that they don't get hit by it, but they're as close to it as they can be safely. And we'll explain more as we exit the phase. Periodically, the boss will use Power Slam, which is a circular AoE that does some damage and will root everyone for a few seconds. It's not a big deal. You just step out of it. If you get hit by it, it's not a massive deal, but step out of it, hit your stun break, or just wait for it to expire, and then move back to your positioning. Not a big deal. We're going to come back to Induction Cascade because that's the big one, but let's skip to the end. When you get Izax to 94%, you end the phase. The way the phase ends is Deflector Pulse, which is going to knock everyone back quite a ways, and this is why the positioning is important. As you can see by the white dotted arrows pointing to where you get knocked back to. Along these lines, we just get knocked back into the middle of the platform. If you're along the wall relative to Izax, then you might get knocked back into the broadcast towers and be safe. My experience has been you most likely will be knocked off the platform to your death. And if you're anywhere in between the tank position and the wall, or the healer DPS position in the wall, anywhere in that middle range, you're much more likely to be knocked off the platform and die, which is why we have people oriented as they are here. So now let's talk about Induction Cascade. Induction Cascade is going to be a 1-second cast by Izax that will target a specific player. That player will get a debuff, like you see here for Induction Cascade, that will tick for 5 seconds, and during that time, it's not doing any damage. All it does is increase that player's movement speed. After 5 seconds, it then starts ticking for 8 more seconds and does a pulsing blue AoE damage and will damage anyone inside of that area of effect. It does very, very high damage, even in story mode. If you're at full health, without healing and without defensives, it might kill you. You will need healing and you should pop a defensive. Also, during that ticking, you deal 0 damage. You have a debuff that reduces your damage by 100%. So what you want to do is you want to get outside of the group. You want to use defensives. And if you're a class that can heal, you should just heal yourself. Or if you're a DPS, you can proc some of your offensive abilities, but wait to use them. After that 8 seconds of taking damage, you then get the red induction rebound buff for 8 seconds that increases your damage by 100%. So you try to minimize your damage, your attacks during induction. Then after induction, you've got an 8-second burst window. So it's a great time to pop cooldowns and use your procs and all that cool stuff. So from a positioning perspective, you see the group is just inside the cleave, facing back towards the middle of the platform. Someone gets induction, they should run to the wall, as you'll note here in the grayed out icons where they drop induction and they stand there to take induction. And then as soon as that's done, they come back to the group again so that they're as safe as possible for the knockback. Okay, so I know it's a fair bit. Let's see this in real time where hopefully it will make more sense. Okay, so let's look at phase 1 from the perspective of a DPS. You'll notice how we're oriented about 2/3 of the way across. That's kind of an approximation. The tanks over there on the left. And we're actually short manning this to extend the phase a little bit so you can see more of the mechanics. So they're starting to fight. So here we go. We're attacking the boss. He does his return fire cast, which you don't really need to worry about in story mode. We're attacking the boss. And after that, he's going to set up his germicidal radiation field, which you're going to see that AoE there on the inside. You don't want to step in it. And you'll notice how all of us are just outside of the swipe cleave. That way none of us get hit by it. If at any point you pull aggro, he'll orient towards wherever you are at that point in time, so he can cleave the group. It's not a big deal though. So there's the power slam. Again, you step out of it, stun break. We're attacking. Here in a few seconds, we're going to get induction. Again, it's random who that goes to, except for it almost never goes to a tank. So I'm the one that gets it. So I go over here to the wall. That's the next safest position. So now it's ticking, and I'm just kind of still attacking anyway. I'm popping a defensive, and I'm just kind of waiting for it to end, get proccing some dots. Now I'm going to go ham on my attacks, and then we're just attacking. In a few more seconds, we'll get another induction, and you just keep on with this pattern until you push the boss to 94%, and then you get knocked back. So we may get another induction. Depending on your group's DPS, you can either have 1, up to maybe 3 or 4, or maybe even none. So there's Deflector Pulse. See how we get knocked back, and we don't get knocked off the platform, but relatively close. So that's phase 1. Okay, so now let's look at phase 1 again from the perspective of a tank. Now it's worth noting here, I have my back, I'm up against the wall. This was actually recorded early in 6.0 before it was apparent to everyone that this was a bad spot. Back in 5.0, you could stand here and be safe almost all of the time. So I said normally you want to be in that other positioning, which we'll show you again in a moment. But again, from the tank's position, my main focus here is I want to make sure I maintain aggro, so I'm going through my triple taunt after a few GCDs, use my AoE taunt after a few GCDs, and then use my single taunt again, and then just go ham. I don't want to cleave the group if possible. You'll notice you're taking a stacking debuff from swipe that causes you to take a little bit more damage from each swipe. In story mode, you can ignore it. It's like 5% buff. It's really small. It's more of a hard mode mechanic where you have to deal with it to avoid getting too many stacks. But again, you're just taking the cleaves. Main focus here is just keep aggro. Notice how I'm a few meters outside of the germicidal radiation field, but I can still hit him. So there we get induction. So one of the players gets induction. They're going to move to the wall to be safe as possible. And we're just going to continue doing the mechanics, doing the fight. And again, this phase, especially for newer players, all you really need to understand is stand with the group and watch for induction. There's deflector pulse, so I get knocked into the wall, into the pillar there, and I survive. So I got lucky there. Again, preferably you want to be at an angle. You can be up against the wall and maybe be okay. Anywhere else in between those spots is death. Okay, so now let's see what happens if your positioning's not great, as mine is bad here. So notice I'm not up against the wall. I'm also not at that angle and bisecting the cleave. So something bad's about to happen to me here. So you'll notice we've got someone on the side for induction. The DPS and healers are pretty well positioned, so we're kind of doing everything really well. Pretty much everyone's doing what they're supposed to except for me, as you're going to see here in a moment. And so I get knocked back and whoop, off the edge I go and I die. So that's why you got to be careful about your positioning. You do have a 30-second res in this fight, so you can get someone up quickly so that if you lose somebody, if you have to lose a tank, or more likely if someone's running out to the side for induction and they just have to be up against the wall and they get knocked off to their death, you do have that res. But ideally you want everyone at those angled positions is the safest way. Okay, so now let's talk about Phase 2. Phase 2 is, for most groups, the most difficult part of the fight, especially for newer players. There's so much going on. This is usually for groups that are not familiar with this fight or have many new players or inexperienced players or less skilled players. Phase 2 is where groups tend to get stuck. Probably 80 to 90% of groups, if they can clear Phase 2, they will clear the op. So Phase 2 is really where it's at. This is the most important phase to focus on. So there's a lot going on here. There's a lot laid out. It's tough to lay this map out in a way that makes a lot of sense. We're going to talk through it here, then we'll show it in real time, and then we'll talk in a little more detail about the specific mechanics. But here we go. So everybody gets knocked back from the deflector pulse at the end of Phase 1. So now you're in the middle of the group. You have a short period of downtime. If you lost anybody that got knocked off the edge, you can get a res out. And then what's going to happen is somewhere around the room, there's going to be a big white circle. Here it's on the northwest corner. It can be any corner. So you can't necessarily predict where it's going to be, but for illustrative purposes, we put it in the northwest here. What you're going to see is a big white circle. Everyone should run to that circle. There will also be a smaller white circle that will move inward. When that smaller white circle compresses inward and disappears, then the anchor is active and people will be sucked into that field if they haven't gotten there already, which leads to a loss of uptime. So everybody should run inside the white circle. Now, there's a lot of adds in this phase, so we're going to go through one by one in order of importance. Now, the most important one is the anchor drone. It's the light blue square. That is going to be in this exact middle of this anchor field that everyone can't get out of. It's like in Phase 1. If you try to run out, you'll get pulled back in. So the first priority and the only real DPS check of this entire game, of this entire fight, is to kill the anchor drone. You have a relatively short time to do that, but you need to kill it immediately. What's going to happen is almost as soon as it appears, the white circle is going to be replaced by a big orange circle, which is going to slowly narrow its way down. If it narrows all the way down and disappears, then Izax is going to hit that entire area with a big AoE attack. So it's basically him narrowing down his targeting. And so you need to kill the anchor drone because once the anchor drone's destroyed, he basically can't target you anymore. So it's a DPS check. You got to kill the anchor drone first. As soon as that happens, the group needs to then pivot to the Electro Tether Droid. The Electro Tether Droid will be towards the nearest broadcast tower pillar. It's the purple square. The Electro Tether Droid will tether somebody. What's preferable is for that to be a tank so that it's not tethering a DPS. A tank or a healer is probably okay because there really shouldn't be any damage going out for this first burst phase. So kill the anchor drone so that the group doesn't get nuked. Then kill the tether drone so that, first of all, somebody can pick up a tether. Because once you kill it, it puts a white circle that you can run into and pick up a tether. But more importantly, you don't want it tethering anybody in place where they could get destroyed by damage. That's the first part. Now the second part is almost as soon as the anchor drone dies, somebody's going to get targeted by induction cascade. Since Izax resets coming into this phase, if you had him on focus target goes away. So unless you're quick enough to reset your focus target and watch a cast bar, you just have to watch the raid frame to see who gets the debuff. Whoever gets it has got to move out of the group. The first cause of a wipe in this phase is not having enough DPS to kill the anchor drone. The second most common cause is a DPS or healer getting induction in the group and not moving out, where everyone just gets nuked by all that AoE damage. Now, as soon as you've got induction under control, you've killed the anchor drone, you've killed the Electro Tether drone, then things slow down a little bit, except for 1 or 2 players. Now, at this point, you're able to look around and you'll see that Izax has his shield up, except this time we're on the outside of it, and we can't damage him while the shield's up, so we've got to bring the shield down. So a couple of players will need to handle that mechanic. Unless it's your job to handle that, then your only real primary responsibility at this point is to get to around the middle of the platform and to deal with the hull cutter droids. They're small, little spidery looking droids. They spawn approximately where these red H markers are, and they will chew up your healers if DPS don't kill them. If there's a free tank with a taunt, it's great to taunt them. DPS can pick them up. The main thing you need to understand about hull cutters is they have dampening field buff, which means they have 90% resistance to AoE damage, so you can't AoE them down like normal adds. You need to single target damage them, or you need to use dot spreads. Dot spreads are actually amazing for killing them. Apart from that, it's just watch for induction, kill hull cutters, and then wait for the shield to come down. So let's walk through this first part before we talk about how to bring the shield down. Okay, so here's the end of phase 1. We've about got Izax to 94%, then we're going to be knocked back. So we knocked back here. We can res someone if we need to. Now we're looking for the white circle. Now Izax is gone. So there we go. We go inside the white circle. In the very middle of it is where we're going to see the anchor drone. That's our top priority. Just to the right of it, you'll see the tether drone. And then there's some other droids. Don't worry about those yet. So first priority for DPS is kill that anchor drone. That's the DPS check. See that orange circle? That orange circle gets all the way down. We take AoE. Here we kill it quickly. Now we need to kill the Electro Tether drone. So first the tank got tethered, here I got tethered, and so I'm taking a lot of damage, and so I die from it because we didn't get it down quickly enough. But we're going to be okay. We kill the Electro Tether drone, and then now we're waiting for the shield to come down. So here's another example. Here's the knockback. There we had the tank against the left wall, and they weren't so lucky and died. So again, that's why positioning-wise you want to be at those angles anytime you can. But again, if you lose one person, you got a battle res on a short cooldown. It's important during this phase in particular if you need to get reses, preferably DPS, so Sage or Sorcerers, Mercenaries or Commandos, or Scoundrels or Operatives. All the off-heal classes have a battle res. They should use it first. Healing can be a little tight during this phase after this first burst phase. So again, we get in the white circle. We got to kill the tether drone. First we kill the anchor drone, then the tether drone. Preferably you want your tank to pick up the tether. You can't interrupt the tether. So there we kill the anchor drone. Now we need to kill the tether drone, so we're good. Notice I get induction cascade here. So I'm getting those AoE blue circles. You'll notice those other blue persistent circles are the Magnetar plasma cannon. Whoever has aggro the boss is going to get those. They are persistent. So you'll notice here I'm about to zap the boss and bring down the shield. And so at this point we're going to DPS the boss. You'll see there's the blue debuff on his bar on the right counting down that gives us a short burn window, and we have to push him sufficiently to 84% in order to push the phase. If you don't get him down the first time, he'll knock you back, which probably will happen. And now we're going to kill hull cutter droids, and now we rinse and repeat these mechanics until we get him to push. Okay, so now you've seen this phase once or twice. Now let's talk about the other adds that we haven't talked about so far. So we've got 4 amplifier drones. Those are the yellow circles. And we have 4 energy drones, which are the pink circles. So we've got an energy drone in every corner, and we've got amplifier drones in the 2 corners closest to Izax, and then on either side relative to Izax. Now, the way that all this works is the energy drones and the amplifiers will aggro following normal aggro mechanics. So they generally will tend to target healers. Failing that, they'll aggro to whoever hits them or taunts them. And the energy drones have an energy beam attack that can charge the amplifiers, and then the amplifiers then can pick up these charges, and then those can be directed at Izax. So anytime any of these are targeting you, you'll see there's a telegraph on the ground that indicates either blue arrows for the energy drone or red arrows for the amplifier, and so you can turn it to aim it in whatever direction you want. And so the overall goal here is to charge an amplifier drone using the energy drone's beam to give it a stack of energy charge, and then turn the charged beam from the amplifier to Izax to break his shield. So let's zoom in a little bit on this map and talk about how to do that. Okay, so we'll show you how to do this live in just a moment, but again, let's look at the maps to help hopefully make the layout make sense. So a couple things to note: the energy beam, you see the mechanic on the right, comes from the energy drone. Every time it does that, it's the one that provides the stacks of charge that we need. Energy charge at the top left is the buff you need to watch for on the amplifier. So by directing the energy drone's beam through the amplifier, it'll hit the amplifier and charge it, giving it 1 stack of energy charge per time that it's hit with the beam. Then at that point, the next time the amplifier fires, it will expend that charge. Now, it's possible to generate multiple charges by either, if you had aggro on multiple amplifiers or multiple energy drones, you could direct multiple energy drones to the same amplifier, and if all of those beams hit before the amplifier fired, you can fire with multiple charges. Or another option, if you have the Tether drone, if you picked up the Tether device from one of the Tether drones, you can use your Tether on the amplifier to pull it and interrupt its charge fire attack, which you can use that to continually interrupt it, and then let multiple energy drone beams fire on it and build up stacks that way. In story mode, you only need 1 charge on the amplifier beam to bring down Izax's shield. Although in higher difficulties, you need more stacks. So if you're comfortable and skilled at this mechanic, you can make it easier for everyone else to shorten the phase by building up multiple charges. So the way you do this positionally is a tank has the easiest time doing this. A healer also can have an easy time because a healer can build aggro through healing. So if you're the healer that tends to have the most healing output, or you just burst heal a bunch of fluff during that phase just to build heal aggro, you can get aggro on both of them without even trying. If you're a tank or a DWT, this is relatively easy, where what you do is first you leap or use a ranged attack or whatever, and you attack the energy drone for a few GCDs to build aggro on it. And then if you have a taunt, throw a taunt on the energy drone, and then as soon as you've done that, you've built some aggro, swap to the amplifier, and then just go ham on it. Just keep attacking it to be safe until you see it ready to fire on you with the charged red beam. And you got to make sure you're positioned like in this map so that the energy drone, when it tries to shoot you, hits the amplifier. Now, as soon as that happens, you then want to pivot to where you are aiming the amplifier's beam towards Izax. It's important to note, hitting the shield is not enough to break it. You have to hit Izax directly. So if you have a too shallow an angle where it clips the shield but misses him, or it's too steep an angle where it clips the side of the shield but misses him, the shield will not go down. You have to aim it at Izax directly. This can be a little problematic, especially if you're the tank, because you might have those Magnetar plasma cannon, those blue bubbles that stick on the ground, and you might have to stand in one, in which case pop a defensive. If you have induction on yourself, that can also make it difficult. Pop a defensive, call out if you need burst healing. Now, once the shield goes down, you saw this a second ago and you'll see it again, the boss takes damage. For every stack of the beam, he takes a little bit over 2% of his health and damage. And then also has a debuff provided by feedback overload, which lasts for 15 seconds. It stuns Izax, so he stops doing anything. And he takes plus 200% or triple damage. And then after that expires, everyone gets knocked back, just like the deflector pulse. So you want to go ham on him during this time, and you rinse and repeat these mechanics until you get to 84%. It's worth noting, if you are able to hit him with a 3-stack or 4-stack beam, you may be able to push the phase in just one cycle through these mechanics. If you're following the traditional story mode goal and just using a 1-stack beam, you'll probably have to do it 3 times, maybe 4 if you've got low DPS, maybe 2 times if you've got really high DPS. So let's see how these mechanics work the simple way in story mode. Okay, let's see this phase from the tank's perspective. So again, I run in here. I'm trying to time my AoE so that I pick up aggro on the Tether drone. I try to avoid using my AoE taunt here so that I have it up for dealing with the ads. But again, I'm waiting for the DPS to help me kill the Tether drone and then kill the anchor drone. Here they killed the Tether first, so I try to run out, but I can't. But my overall priority is I taunted the energy drone, as you may have seen, and then I'm attacking the amplifier to get its aggro. So then the amplifier gets hit. It has 1 stack of energy charge, which I aim towards the boss, and bam, down goes the shield. Now we have 15 seconds to burn the boss. You'll notice he took around 2% damage from the beam. I'm AoE taunting to grab the hull cutters to keep them off of everyone else, so DPS and healers can focus on damaging the boss, and boom, there we go. So, okay, let's see it again from the perspective of DPS. It's worth noting, if you do have the tank with aggro die as you transition out of this phase, Izax seems to like pause for a little while, which can be, I guess, helpful. Gives you more of a cooldown reduction on your combat res. Although you'll notice in this actual video, this was before they fixed the bug where you only got 1 res, but believe me, if you run it now, you'll have a 30-second cooldown. So as a DPS, I'm not trying to pick up the Tether drone, I'm just trying to help kill the anchor drone. So I'm trying to position myself where like my dot spreads will work, but I'm not really worried about it. I'm primarily going to rely on the other DPS to kill it so that I can get out there to help. So now I'm killing the Tether drone, I went in and helped. So now here I go. I'm going to leap towards the energy drone. I hit it, or actually I hit it with saber throw. It's probably better to use a few more GCDs of attacks, but that's enough. And then I come out here and I'm just wailing on the amplifier until I know it's going to fire. The tricky part to this is if you taunt too late, it can, it'll target somebody else anyway. Like if you taunt it while it's targeting someone else's beam, it won't reposition. Once it's decided to fire at you, it will, and it'll just fire at you with the next one. And so there we go. Now we're aiming the beam and just wailing on the boss. Again, depending on your DPS, you may have to repeat these mechanics a couple of times. During this time, kill the hull cutters. Again, avoid AoEs unless they're dot spreads, otherwise just single target. Get back in the white circle. We're going to kill the anchor drone some more, and same thing with the Tether drone. Got to get those down quickly. Got to watch out for induction. The most important thing for new players here is watch out, see who gets induction. So I'm going to leap out here. I'm going to single taunt the energy drone, and then I'm just going to use all my DPS abilities on the amplifier, and boom, there you go. It's ready to target, ready to fire, and bam, the shield's down just about as quickly as you could want to happen. A thing that can help this is if you have the group move towards the middle, based on the positioning, that should mean that energy drones should be automatically hitting the amplifiers, so that if you do lose aggro on the energy drone, hopefully it'll still hit the amplifier anyway. Once you get the boss to 84%, you push through this phase. Okay, so now let's take a look at a little more complicated for those that are interested in running this in hard mode or just would like to shorten this phase. Okay, so this is a clip from hard mode, so bear with me, a few things will be a little different. In this position, what we're actually going to do is we're going to use the amplifier on the side, and we're going to get a 4-stack beam, which is the most that you want to. If you do get an amplifier to 5 stacks, it'll explode. So here as the tank, I'm guilding aggro on the Tether drone and the energy drone that's right there, so that I get an easy charge, and I'm grabbing the Tether, I'm hitting the energy drone. Another DPS is going to help me a little bit, but I'm going to take this amplifier on the side. It's actually been hit twice now, so it's got 2 stacks. As you can see, I'm kiting the energy drone to it, so now it's got 3, and I'm just going to use the Tether to interrupt it. Now it's a little tricky, you kind of have to keep pulling it until you get it angled the way you want. So I'm pulling it here and I'm waiting. Now it's got 4 stacks, and now we're going to zap the boss, and it's going to do way more damage. In hard mode, you need 3 or 4 stacks just to break the shield, so it's mandatory. But even in story mode, that can help. You have to do about 10% damage, and so having a 4-stack beam does almost all that damage by itself. So it's a great way, if you know how to do it, to shorten the phase for everybody, where they don't have to repeat these mechanics. Particularly if DPS is an issue, or if you have a lot of people that die, it's an option. But be careful. Another option is you could take just the 1 amplifier, and you could just keep pulling it to interrupt it and let the 1 energy drone keep firing. That'll take a lot more time. So there's a variety of ways to do that, but just know it's an option. Okay, so now let's talk about phase 3, or as we like to call it, the interrupt phase. This phase is a lot less stressful, it's a lot simpler, a lot easier to keep track of. So the first thing that's going to happen is Izax is going to appear at a random position. For map and layout purposes, I've always shown Izax to the right, but it won't necessarily be that. It could be any direction. And at that point, he's going to blast the group with Omni Cannon. It deals god damage. It is unavoidable. You can't. Defensives don't help you, so don't waste them. The key is that healers get the group healed up quickly so that the blast is survivable. It'll do about 70% of your health, then heal everyone up. So at that point, the proper phase mechanics begin. Izax is going to start casting Charge Omni Cannon, which adds 2 stacks of Omni Cannon charge. If he gets to 100 stacks of Omni Cannon charge, he will blast the group with Omni Cannon and wipe the group. So our goal here is to keep interrupting those casts while we damage Izax until we get Izax to 64%, at which point the phase ends. Now, initially, Izax has this armoring, indicated here by the orange circle. It's not quite as big a circle. As you'll see in a moment, it's more of like, it almost looks like armoring. But nevertheless, we have to damage it to break it so that we can then interrupt the boss. At that point, you just follow your normal mechanics. Now, something else that happens at the beginning of this phase is 2 Electro Tether drones spawn that you want to kill so that they're not stunning people. You can do this a couple of ways. You can either have DPS wait to kill the Tether drones as soon as they pop up, or you can kind of split your DPS and have everyone jump on Izax first. Then once the Tether drones spawn, then have some DPS break off to kill the Tether drones. If you can break the shield before the Tether drones spawn, that's actually kind of nice so that you can get those interrupts started faster. And then you'll want someone to pick up those tethers. Now, for interrupt purposes, the main thing is you just don't want to waste them. So it's good to have a call-outs or a pattern or whatever. You don't have to be perfect in story mode. The key is to make sure you're interrupting most of them. Anytime you interrupt Charge Omni Cannon, Izax waits a couple of seconds before he does it again. If you don't interrupt it, he'll literally, as soon as he finishes one cast, he starts the other. So as long as you're interrupting some of them, it dramatically slows down the rate at which Izax picks up stack of Omni Cannon charge. Also good to know, some classes can get multiple interrupts. By far the best particular discipline for this encounter, for this phase, is Guardian and Juggernaut players. With the proper utility, they can get 3 consecutive interrupts, and they're interrupts on a very short cooldown, so they can get an interrupt. They can step out of melee range and use their leap to get a second interrupt, which then resets the cooldown on their regular interrupt, and then they can get a third. Honestly, if you have 2 skilled Guardian or Juggernaut players, those 2 can get almost probably every single interrupt if need be. If you don't have that, or your players aren't skilled enough or coordinated enough to do that, it's not a big deal. Just make sure you're calling them out. Voice comm is really helpful to say, I've got the next interrupt, and then they get it, and then someone else calls out the next one. In hard mode, it's much tighter. Story mode, just do the best you can. It'll probably be fine. Now, the other thing to know is if you have trouble with it and it looks like Izax is going to get to 100 stacks anyway, it's not the end of the world. You can reset him. Now, we'll show this live in a second, but on one of the 2 broadcast towers to the side of Izax, there's going to be a little button, which if you mouse over it will say Broadcast Overload Failsafe. And if you walk up and click it, it'll start a short cast of disabling that'll take 4 seconds, and after that cast finishes, it will basically overload the tower and electrocute Izax, which will deal about 6% damage. And remember, we have to deal about 20% damage to take him from 84 to 64 here. So it'll do almost a third of the damage you need to do, and will cause him to disappear, and he'll reset and reappear shortly, and will reset his stacks of Omni Cannon. So you can use that tool in story mode. It's pretty rare to need to use the failsafe more than once. You can use it multiple times if you need to. You can use it up to 3 times, actually. So the best course of action here is kill the tethers, break the orange shield, interrupt Izax. If it looks like you're getting into like 70, 80 stacks, have preferably a healer or a tank. Someone other than a DPS is optimal. Run over there and hit the button at some time when Izax reaches about 85 to 90 stacks or something like that. Earlier is fine. It's better to do it too early than too late, but don't do it initially. And then that, honestly, the vast majority of groups will give you enough cushion. When he reappears, you'll have to break his shield again, but then you can just DPS him again and follow the same mechanics. Okay, enough talking about me. Let's see this live. Okay, so here we are, we're ending phase 2. You see the indicator, there's the orange armoring around him there, indicates we've cleared the phase. Scyva will talk at us for a moment. So now kill the hole cutters. The main thing here is heal everyone up. So get everyone at least above 70%, preferably at full health. And then we're about to be blasted by Omni Cannon. Here, again, there's nothing you can do. You're just going to take the damage, get relatively low, and then healers will heal everyone up. After a few seconds, there's the 2 Electro Tether Droids. So kill them, interrupt them if you can. It's always helpful so that they don't stun people. Here we're short manning it. Induction Cascade does go out during this phase. You can see here someone gets induction, so they got to get out of the group. We kill the Tether Drones, and now we're on the boss. At this point, we've got to break that orange shielding. He's going to typically get anywhere from 15 to 30 stacks, depending on how coordinated your DPS is. So now his shield's gone. Now we can start cycling through our interrupts. So again, it's good to have a pattern, whether you go, top to bottom in the raid frames, or just people call it out. So there, I get 1. Now I'm going to leap back in to get 2, and then I actually missed that 1, and then I'll get a 3rd here. So Jugs and Guardians are awesome for this. You don't need to be that good. Main other thing is just to watch out for induction. You can interrupt induction during this phase if your interrupts are fast enough, which is nice, but not super critical. Same rules apply for induction. You can't do damage while it's ticking. So save up your hits when it expires and you get the red induction rebound to get the DPS boost. And you're just sitting here damaging him. The better coordinated your interrupts are, the better. If you just DPS him normally, it does extend the phase a little while because you don't have any damage buffs during this phase. During the phase 2, when we blasted him with the laser, we were getting a couple of percentage points of health taken off by the laser, plus he was taking triple damage. The next phase, there's also a damage buff. This is like the only sustained damage phase where we have to take off 20% of his health without any damage buffs. So if you're well coordinated for DPS and interrupts, you can do it this way. If you're able to do the tower, that can actually be pretty helpful to shorten the phase as well, although it does take a little bit of coordination. But anyway, you get the idea here. Let's see how the tower mechanic works now. Okay, so here's another look at this phase. You can see there on just to the right of Izax is where the pillar's activated. So we have a player over there ready to click the button. A ranged DPS or a healer can pretty much just set up over there. That way they don't have to move when it's time to hit the button, and they can DPS or heal or whatever as appropriate. And in this case, you can either interrupt, you can ignore the interrupts, and once he gets to either a decent amount of health or a decent amount of stacks, depending on how many times you want to zap him. So there we go, we zapped him once. He does about 6% damage. Here we're going to zap him twice. And so we'll show you how to do this in a moment, but the key is you click the button once, that's easy. Now notice the pillar we zapped him on is now kind of fried, but that's still going to be important. So now we're going to go to the boss. So now he pivoted, so now the zapped pillar is on our left. Now we've got the orange shield again, we've got to kill the tether drones again, but notice there's this additional connector node that's being pulled to the middle there. That's going to be important because we have to connect the pillar we use to another one in order to power it up. So let's see how that works. Okay, so here's a map. In this case, I'm assuming the tower we zapped was on the left side, which actually is consistent with that example, although it isn't necessarily always going to be that. So again, we reset. We've got the orange shield again. We've got the tether drones again. We need to get rid of those first so they're not tethering people that need to move. Now, the extra one was that conductor drone, that tall kind of obelisk-looking object. That's also movable, so you want to have a player with a tether pull it to right equidistant between those two pillars, which basically means it'll be just almost directly in front of Izax. Now, one player can do that. Another player, and you can actually have as many players as you want to do this. You can have up to 3 players handle this, where one player pulls the conductor drone, and then you have one player go to the left pillar and one player go to the right pillar. Or in story mode, one player can do all of it. At any rate, you pull the connector drone in front of the boss, and then what's going to happen, and I'll show you visually how this looks in a moment, but then one player goes, and there's a little circular indentation on the platform, and they go to either side. I always go to this, if I'm doing it by myself, I go to whichever pillar was zapped previously, because I know I can't reuse it, and I go basically stand on that little indentation while I'm targeting the conductor drone. There'll be a little orb above my head showing I've positioned myself right, and then I use my tether, which will connect the conductor drone to the little device that's sitting in that indention, which will connect it. And then I'll go to the right side, the side that we have not used yet and that we want to power up, and I'll do the exact same thing. And in that way, I'm connecting the pillar that had power to the one I now want to use. And once both of those are connected, that same failsafe button will become clickable and I can activate it. So in this case, if you're willing to do this, and this is pretty easy, and you only need one player to do it, can dramatically shorten the phase because you can basically DPS Izax for 3 or 4% of his health, then zap him, which is another 6. So now you've done about 10%, and then you reset. You get this all positioned. You let the DPS do another 3 to 4% damage on the boss, and then you wait to zap him as soon as he reaches about 69%, and then the zap will get him down to 64, and you've probably shortened the phase by half to 2/3. Can be pretty helpful. And it's good to know how to do this because you have to do it in hard mode. Now, there is an even more advanced position and process if you want to zap him a 3rd time. Okay, so I want to preface this by saying you 100% should not ever need to do this in story mode, but you likely will need to know how to do it in hard mode. So I always think it's a good idea to know how to do it. And anytime I run this off with folks, I encourage the players to do this and see how to do it. So the more people that know how to do it, the better, because it's good practice, because it can be very confusing to do it in hard mode under all the pressure. But again, in this scenario, Izax is on the right of the map. The front towers, number 1 and number 2, are like destroyed because we've zapped them. So now, to zap him a 3rd time, we need to connect both of the back towers. We have to have them both powered up in order to zap him. So in this scenario, in story mode, you can have one person do it, but they're running all over the place. What usually works really well is to have one player to each side. In story mode works fine. In hard mode, you typically need probably about 3 or 4 players to handle this, but 2 players is fine. Again, the more that help, the better. But what you basically do is you pull the conductor drone in between the front left and back left, and then in between the front right and back right pillars. And then you do the same thing. You go to the front pillars that are zapped, and you connect the conductor drones. Then you go to the back pillars, and you connect the back pillars to the conductor drones. That activates them. You click both buttons, and once both pillars in the back have been activated, then they'll zap the boss. So if you want to, keep in mind it's about 6% damage, so which means just using all 3 pillars alone almost fully pushes Izax. This is the way you do it in hard mode. In story mode, you can do this, and it will dramatically shorten the phase. Just make sure you've got the coordination to do it, because if you zap him, and then you zap him again, and then you can't figure out this part, could be problematic, but is kind of cool. So let me show you a video of how that works, although this is actually a hard mode example, but should be good for illustrative purposes. Okay, so again, this is an example from hard mode, so don't mind a few differences. We're going to get more tether drones in hard mode. The boss also periodically reshields, but bear with me in terms of the positioning is the main example here. So again, the boss is going to reset. In this case, it's exactly, notice we have 2 of those pillars at the front there are both blasted, so we need to connect them to the back ones. Here, what we're going to try to do is, we've got all these tethers. Again, in hard mode, you get 4. In story mode, it's 2. You'll notice there's 2 conductors, one on the left and one on the right. I'm going to be going to the right, and I'm going to handle basically everything as soon as I'm free. So now I'm pulling the right conductor, and I'm hitting a speed boost. I'm pulling it in the middle, right about here. So now it's positioned. Now I'm going to run to the front. You'll notice that the beam's kind of connecting me. Now watch above my head. It's a little tough with my bar there, but I've got that orange icon. So now I use my tether. And now it's connected. Now in hard mode, you lose your tether. In story mode, you won't. But again, I'll target my conductor, run to the back one. Now I get a blue orb. I use my tether. Now I'm powered up. And then I just click the button. And once both back buttons have been clicked, we zap the boss. And then boom. And there we zapped him. That's the 3rd time. And pretty much it's guaranteed to push to the next phase at this point. Okay, now we're moving on to phase 4. We often call the purple orb phase. So you can see there's an augment droid here with a big red or purple circle. The general strategy for this can be pretty simple, but we're going to want to pull it ahead. One thing to note here before we talk too much about the mechanics, you'll see the railing there on the side is crackling with electricity. It's electrified at this point, so if anyone stands on it, You can see one person there is standing on it and taking continuing damage. So at this point, and for the rest of the fight, standing on the railing or standing on those elevated corner platforms will deal very heavy damage. Now during this phase, there's a couple things going on. There's a bunch of orbs behind us. There's the purple orb, a big circle. There's a player over there at the top of the screen dropping blue puddles, and then we're all damaging the boss, and then there's some ads coming in. So a couple of different things going on here, but actually for the most part a fairly straightforward phase in story mode. So let's take a look at the layout and what we need to do here. Okay, so as I said, there's kind of a lot going on here, even though the phase is relatively straightforward. So let's take it one step at a time. So first, let's talk about the augment droid. That's the purple orb that has the big circle. It's super important that everybody, except for possibly one tank, stays inside that circle at all times. The reason for that is anybody inside that circle gets a buff called optimized augmentation. It's at the top left of this layout map. And that essentially for DPS and anybody dealing damage, so tanks and potentially healers, buffs your damage by 200%. That's going to be really important to push Izax as well as to deal with the hole cutter droids. So we want everyone inside the purple circle. Usually we pull the circle a little closer to the boss and then just basically tell everybody other than the one tank, have everybody stand just in front of, or in the case of one of the two tanks, maybe just behind the augment droid. The reason for that has to do with the energy drone and amplifier drones, which make a return from phase 2. Now, in this case, the energy drone in the middle is untauntable, and so it's going to alternate between targeting one of the 4 amplifier drones that are arranged in a square or X pattern around it. And so it's going to target one of those, and it's going to give it 1 stack of energy charge, and then that amplifier is going to target whoever has aggro, typically a healer, perhaps a tank if they're using AoE taunts, and they clip that amplifier. They'll target it with an amplified energy beam, which scales the amount of damage that it does per its number of stacks of energy charge. Now, the simple way to do this in story mode is basically kind of to ignore those droids, but the positioning is important here because if tanks are not using AoE taunts, then those amplifiers are always going to aggro generally to healers who are standing right in front of the purple orb. You may say, well, why is that important? It's important because that means no matter which of those 4 amplifiers is targeting the group, it's always going to be angled in such a way that it hits Izax. That's important because the amplified energy beam will deal around 2%, a little over 2% of Izax's health and damage, and it also applies a debuff that lasts for 15 seconds that increases Izax's damage taken by 200%. So this means, as long as everyone's in the purple orb, and those amplifier beams should be casting about every 12 to 13 seconds, which means you should have full uptime on the buff, which means everybody's going to be dealing triple damage, and Izax is going to be taking triple damage. So at level 70, as of the time this video is being made, sustained DPS at level 70 content tends to be anywhere from 10k to around 13, 14k. So it's not at all uncommon between these two buffs to see people for this phase of the fight deal 60, 70k, sometimes less, but sometimes more. But you can do really high damage, which is important because you have to chew through a lot of Izax's health here. So that's the positioning. There are just a couple other things to be aware of. One is that Induction Cascade, our good friend, will continue to go out. And so when a DPS or healer gets it, the group needs to watch for it. And whoever gets it usually steps out. The way this map's drawn, they'd step out to the right. They basically just need to move opposite from wherever the tank is going. They don't have to leave the purple circle, just move far enough away from the group that they're not going to clip anyone with the AoE, and then that's it. Now, hole cutters are going to spawn. They typically spawn in waves of 6, and they tend to spawn around these positions. They still have their debuff, Dampening Field, that gives them really high AoE DR. So depending on your group composition, when they run into the group, you do need to kill them. It's a good idea for one of your two tanks, preferably the one staying in close with the group, to use an AoE taunt to grab their aggro to keep them off the healers, and DPS need to kill them. Now, if you have a group that has lots of dot spreading and lots of dot spread classes, then you can really just kind of ignore them, and just as soon as they come in, use your dot spread and just let the dots, between the boosted damage from the purple circle, the dots will kill them very quickly. If you don't have, half or more of your group able to dot spread, then you need to have some DPS just swap to single target and burn them down individually so that they don't overwhelm your healers. That's really it. You just burn through this fight. It is possible, depending on your level of health, for Izax to, fly away and then reposition. If that's the case, he'll wherever he reappears, you just have somebody with a tether grab the augment droid and just pull it along and then reposition it in this fashion where it's directly in front of the boss. That way everyone's getting the optimized augmentation buff, and they're positioned in such a way that those amplifiers keep zapping Izax and dealing damage and making sure the damage taken debuff has full uptime on Izax. Now this phase ends when Izax reaches around 33%, so you actually have to chew through the most health. You're chewing through a little over 30% of Izax's health. With those debuffs, though, it goes really, really quickly. It's a pretty easy fight. The main thing, as with earlier phases, is just getting the positioning right, make sure the tank has aggro, and just watch for induction cascade. And this phase is pretty easy. Okay, so now we have a short transition phase before we get to the last main phase of the fight. We call this the Master Blaster phase. What's going to happen is Izax is going to fly away, and he's going to basically fly in a giant circle around the platform. And he's going to launch a series of 8 missiles that are going to target the platform, and they basically target in a 3x3 grid. So you can see here all the possible positions. Now, one of those orange circles is not actually going to be there because it's only 8 missiles. And so based on that positioning, those blue circles essentially represent the safe spot that you would move to if that circle is not actually being targeted by a missile. And so you'll do that 4 times. It moves in a fixed pattern around the room. In fact, I'll show you in a second, if you're careful in orienting your camera, you can actually watch him, and you can actually see from the missiles coming in the pattern. This is important in hard mode because in hard mode there are no orange circles, so you have to identify the missiles and figure out the safe spot. Story mode, you don't have to worry about it. You just need to basically move. Except for the middle, it's always going to be a position. And the way I have these circles, it's actually a little further out. You're a little closer to the edge. So you're either at one of the corners just below the ramp, or you're at one of the middle spots right next to the railing, or you're smack dab in the middle, as I'll show you here as one hypothetical example. Then we'll see it live. So in this example scenario, the group's roughly the middle of the platform, which is probably where they tend to be beginning and going into the fight. And so there are 8 missiles, and position 3, as I've noted here, is absent a missile. And so in order to survive the missile volley, the group needs to run to position 3. It's important not to step onto the railing of either the corner broadcast tower platforms or the side railing because it is electrified and will deal quite a bit of damage. It's a good time to use speed boosts and speed buffs. It's particularly helpful to coordinate group speed buffs, whether that's the Sentinel Transcendence or Marauder Predation or Vanguard or Power Techs have a utility that they can take that will let them use their stealth scan to provide a decent speed buff as well. You have to do this 4 times, so you're going to run to a safe spot. The orange circles will then hit and deal damage if anyone's in the circle, and then you'll have another cycle, and you'll do that for 4 separate combinations before you complete the phase. An important thing to note is, well, what happens if you get hit by a missile? Well, story mode, especially getting hit by one missile is not typically going to kill you. It'll deal a fair bit of damage. It will apply a stack of searing plasma, which you can see on the screen. That's a fairly long duration debuff, 25 seconds long, that reduces your healing received by 95%. So what this basically means is if you get clipped by an orange circle, you're probably okay, but you cannot get clipped by another one or you'll die because no one's going to be able to heal you up during that phase until the debuff is gone. It's also worth noting that depending on your movement, one missile generally won't kill you, but depending on your position, you might get clipped by multiple circles. So if you see the movement pattern here and following the white arrow, where the group starts, they would have two circles overlapping. So if someone just stood there, they'd get hit by two missiles and probably die. Once they move out into the range of the circle number 4, there's just one missile that could clip them, and they're probably okay. They'd probably survive that one. If they moved a little to the left, there's a spot where circles 2 and 4 overlap. So it's better to move quickly. It's a good idea for somebody that has a quick reaction time and good latency to have a marker on their head. You can also use callouts to say, depending on where the group is oriented, you might say, back right corner, front left corner, to the left side or in the middle, or stay here. Everyone can call it out differently, but it is fairly helpful if you can identify it quickly. If you don't have any speed buffs and you have to go from one corner to all the way across the platform, if you don't start moving almost instantaneously, it can be difficult to get there if you don't have a speed buff available. So make sure to coordinate. So if you have a sentinel in the group, use Transcendence on the first one, have the group use their own personal speed buffs on the second one, and then you'll have Transcendence up again for the fourth one, or whatever that you can use. Just make sure everyone knows what those abilities are. Okay, so let's see this live. Okay, so here we are finishing Purple Orb phase, phase 4. Purple Orb's going to disappear, pylons are going to disappear, everything's going to disappear, and now we're just watching for orange circle combinations. And where's the safe spot? The more you can zoom out your camera, the better. So I'm looking, and there in the middle is where we're going to go. So that's pretty easy to get to. And that one, it's probably better to not use speed buffs if you don't have to. And now that's position 1. So now we're going to look for another pattern, and here we see it's back left. And so this one's a little tougher to get to. And you just got to run. You see those orange circles, those smaller ones, when they go all the way in, you're going to get hit by the missiles. So there we made it okay. Now we're basically going back to where we were a moment ago. Again, any speed buffs you can use are helpful, but if you just keep moving, if you're not sure where to go, it's a good idea to kind of move towards the middle, because if it's a far position, that'll get you moving in the right direction. If it's either staying put where you are or positioned near you, then you can just turn back around and still have plenty of time. But you survive those, and then here you go to the next phase. Now let's see this again from the hard mode perspective, just so you know how that works. Okay, so this is actually a hard mode view. Notice the purple orb's actually glowing here because it works a little differently. The key is, and this works the same in story mode, except you're not going to see orange circles, but the key is to see the missiles. So in hard mode, you have to look to see them. So there's Izax in this distance there, so he's firing his missiles. And you look up at the screen, you see the missiles coming in, you see, okay, front middle. Now in story mode, you'll have the orange circles, so you don't really need to do this, but I think it's cool because the same stuff still works. So now he's flying in a clockwise fashion, so we were looking west on our map, and we know we need to get to the corner. Now, since he's moving around, we're going to have to look clockwise. You see a few people picked up the debuff since you don't have as much time to react, given you have to visually identify the missiles. So we still do a pretty good job here. And then we have one last combination. Again, you don't need to do this. I think it's cool to mention it because you can still identify these missiles. It's a good idea if you run with a group that has any aspirations of doing this fight in hard mode. It's a good idea to get some practice there, because that is probably the biggest barrier to clearing this fight in hard mode, is being able to get your entire group through that phase, especially with that debuff, is awfully tough. So anyway, let's move on. Let's talk about just one more phase to go. Okay, so here we are at Phase 5. Phase 5 has a lot going on and can be incredibly confusing your first time through. So first, let's talk about the mechanics. Then we'll put out together a layout that tries to show all the different stuff going on, and then we'll show this live in a way that hopefully makes a little bit of sense. The key thing to know, though, is in story mode, at this point, DPS is mostly irrelevant. Tanking damage is mostly irrelevant. At this point, there's a few mechanics to execute, and people just need to stay alive in order to clear this phase in story mode. So there's a few mechanics. Now there's a couple of different ads that are not on the map yet, but the first thing we start with is the Gemini droid. It's going to look exactly like Scyva, the previous boss. In the lore of this fight, we destroyed Scyva, but Scyva's consciousness still survived and is somehow, for some reason, helping us against Izax. And so Scyva basically downloaded itself into this Gemini droid. Since the Gemini droid's, I guess, not as strong, the Gemini droid can't move, can't attack, can't really do anything. So it is immobile unless you do something to it. It doesn't heal itself, won't move. So you basically have to babysit the Gemini droid. It starts a cast during this fight called Voice of Iocath. It's kind of in the middle, the purplish looking buff. That buff lasts for 2 minutes, for 120 seconds, and that's your timer for this fight. You have to keep the Gemini droid alive for 120 seconds, and then you automatically move to the next phase. Essentially what's happening is Scyva is hacking Izax, and it takes 120 seconds to do it, and then Scyva overloads Izax's Omni Cannon, and then it explodes and destroys Izax. And oh, by the by, also destroys most of this platform, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. So that's our overall goal. The Scyva droid can be healed and shielded, and it should be by your healers. It's who you should be focus targeting during this fight, during this phase anyway. But there's a whole bunch of ads. So let's talk about these in order. So we're going to start with the energy drones. They'll be the pink circles when we move to the next map. They will be arrayed in a row on the opposite side of the platform from Izax, and they will create these energy balls, which are basically these big green orbs. A lot of people call this phase the Frogger phase because they'll send 4, 5, 6 of them down the path, aiming towards Izax. You just have to dodge them. If you run through them, they deal damage. Ideally, you use your tether to pull the Gemini droid along with you, so you also keep the Gemini droid out of these green energy balls. In addition to that, Izax is going to be targeting the group with missile volley. Those are going to take the form of orange circles. There'll be individual orange circles on random players that you just move out of. He'll also do a channeled attack on the Gemini droid where he'll put several orange circles in sequence, and they'll detonate in sequence. And so you just, again, a healer can do it. I usually prefer to have one of the 2 tanks have this responsibility so that the healers can focus on healing. And you have one tank use their tether to just steadily pull the Scyva droid along and out of danger. Anybody that gets clipped by those AoEs will get a stack of adaptive shrapnel, which is a fairly long duration debuff that increases the damage you take from those missiles. And each tick does damage. So if you get stunned and stuck in one of those circles and you get 8, 9, 10, 12 stacks, that is the most common cause of somebody dying by getting stuck in those missile volley circles. The next droid we need to talk about are the Electro Tether droids. So they are going to spawn there are going to be 3 waves during this phase, and there's going to be 1 tether droid from each corner broadcast tower platform, and they're going to move in towards the Gemini droid, and they'll tether the Scyva droid. And when they're tethered, the Scyva droid can't move. If they're interrupted or somebody else gets aggro on them, they'll tether other players. So you can get stunned and rooted in place, and then a green bubble hits you, or a mine hits you, or a missile volley orange circle hits you. There's a lot of ways to take damage in this phase. But more dangerously, if they tether the Gemini droid, not only can you not pull Scyva, but Izax switches to using a radar locking missile that will target both the Gemini droid as well as players that you cannot avoid. So it becomes much more damaging. The other thing that's dangerous is if you try to tether the Gemini droid while it's being stunned by an Electro Tether droid, you will get stunned yourself via the debuff. You see Violent Shock here. That will stun you as well, which makes it doubly dangerous. So, and lastly, there are the combat mines, which come in periodic waves from basically any direction other than the side that Izax is on. And they'll come in waves of around 5 or 6 mines, and if they reach the Gemini droid, they will put a big circle on the ground and blow up. You may have seen these mines during the ad waves on your way to a couple of the bosses and gods, and so you want to deal with those as well. So there's a lot of ways. The green Frogger bubble damage, the boss's missile volley damage, or the combat mine explosions can all deal a fair bit of damage. So those are the mechanics. And oh, by the way, we still have electrical overload, so if you step on the railing, you'll take a ton of damage too. So how do we deal with that? Well, let's talk about that now. Okay, so same map, but here's with all the stuff going on without all the mechanics taking up space. So the tether drones, the purple squares, will spawn in 3 waves. 1 wave early on in the phase, 1 halfway through, and 1 near the end. And they'll spawn from the 4 corners. So in an 8-man group, it's kind of easy. Each DPS takes a corner, and they DPS that Electro Tether droid and kill it. If it starts rooting anything, you interrupt it. Another alternative is you can have all the DPS go to one side and kill those tethers, and then go to the other side and kill the other wave of tethers. If you do that, you'd want to pull the Gemini droid in whichever direction DPS are moving first. That way the tethers on the other side, they're not being initially damaged, have to go further before they can cause trouble. Either of those is successful. The key is you want to DPS them, keep them interrupted, and kill them as quickly as possible. Because if they start rooting people, you'll take a lot of damage. If they root the Gemini droid, Izax will start hitting you with missiles you can't dodge, which you want to avoid. So the energy drones on the far side will send waves of energy balls. Here I've just shown 4 as an illustration. It can vary in terms of the number and the positioning. There will always be 1 or 2, maybe more safe spots. And so based on their pathing, you just pull the Gemini droid and all the players themselves should move to a safe spot so they don't take any damage. Obviously, if you're being rooted by the Tether droids, this becomes much more problematic. The other thing is you typically will have one tank. Like I said, my preferred alignment is DPS deal with combat mines. Healers stay kind of in the middle and just heal people and heal the Gemini droid. One tank deals with combat mines, and another tank babysits the Gemini droid. So whichever tank's dealing with mines, you see I have a row here, the yellow, orange diamonds. They'll come in from the electrified railing and start moving inwards. And so what you do is, as that happens, one tank runs behind them and just targets to them in sequence and then hits their tether. That'll basically pull the mine over the tank's head, and they'll land on the electrified railing and be destroyed. And so literally, I'll show this segment, you run behind them and tab tether, tab tether, tab tether, tab tether, and then they're done. And it's nice and easy. The only key is that tank just needs to be in the middle of the platform whenever they're not dealing with mines and help with tether droids. And as soon as they see a row of mines, they need to run out to them. The key thing to remember here is don't tether them while you're inside of the platform relative to them, or else you'll fling them over your head on top of who knows who, and that's an easy way to kill a teammate. So be careful. And that's really it. Otherwise, you just keep an eye on the Voice of Iocath timer. Once you get to the point where it's obviously most of the way through its cast, and you have maybe 15, 20 seconds or whatever left, if the Gemini droid's above like 50, 60% health at that point, honestly, you could probably ignore most mechanics and just let the Gemini droid take its damage, and it probably will be fine. And at that point, you can focus on getting people healed up. And everybody, as you exit this phase, people are going to want to be positioned as far away from Izax as they can, because, as we'll talk about in a minute, the safe spots are going to be based on the far corner platforms. But anyway, now we've talked about all the mechanics. I apologize, this is a confusing phase, so hopefully this is helpful. Let's see this live. Okay, so here we are coming out of the Master Blaster phase, as we sometimes like to call it, due to the similarity of the orange circles. So there's the Gemini droid in the middle. Our goal is to keep her alive. Like I said, it's a good idea to focus target. You can see the Voice of Iocath buff there. That's our timer. And now we're just dealing with tether droids. We want to kill them as quickly as possible. If they start tethering anybody, interrupt them. And then, so we're dealing with those. That's going to happen first. Now the Gemini droid got tethered, so you see those orange circles tracking us. That's because it was tethered. You can't dodge them. If you're able to keep the boss from being tethered, then you don't have to worry about it. So here's the row of mine. So I'm the tank, so I'm dealing with, so I run behind them and tether them, and then tether them, then tether them, and then tether that one too. And you see how I pull them. Except here I do something stupid and I tether the boss, so I almost kill myself. So don't do that. But you can see how I just flip the mines over my head, and then they're totally fine. Now I'm going to grab, we're going to be grabbing the Gemini droid and moving it to safety whenever it's not tethered. So the Gemini droid's high on health, and I see more tether droids. We're going to go try and kill those as quickly as we can while dodging these Frogger bubbles. Again, the key here is surviving. You can see the Gemini droid's been clipped by various explosives and it's doing okay. So now I'm going to get more mines, fling them behind me, nice and easy, and we just keep on doing that. Now at this point, we're most of the way through the phase. We're getting another wave of tethers. We might be able to ignore this wave. It's a good idea to kill it anyway if you can. You see we did lose a player here due to damage, which is easy to do. We're almost done with this phase. Scyva's at 81%, so I'm going to get this last row of mines, and then at that point, we're probably pretty safe. Again, got to be careful how you fling these mines. One of those got flung in a weird direction because somebody helping, but thankfully no one died. So you can see them pulling the boss, and now we're just about done with the phase, and we're going to move to the end. But let's see this one more time from another perspective real quick. Okay, so here we go. We're coming back to this phase from from another pull. Same thing, focus target, the Gemini droid, watch its timer, kill tethers. It's more important to interrupt them if they start casting than it is to do anything else. It's a good idea for the tank to taunt the boss if they can, but it's not a huge deal. And again, now it's channeling, so I'm going to interrupt. It's going to start channeling again in a second. I said you really need your DPS well coordinated. So see here, I pulled the boss while it was the Gemini droid while it was tethered, and I got stunned briefly. And here I am being stunned again, and no one's dealing with mines, so now mines are starting to explode. If you're quick, you can pull the Gemini droid out, like you saw me do there. So you're quick. Now here's where it's chain spamming those missiles. So if you're able to pull the Gemini droid out, that's really, really helpful. Though it's that particular attack that does the most damage to the Gemini droid. So from a positioning perspective, it's not a bad idea to have the Gemini droid closer to Izax early in this phase, because it gives you more room to move around. As you get later on in this fight, you'll want to be closer to the back. And so again, here people are getting targeted by circles because the Gemini droid's being tethered. And here I'm being stunned because I tethered the droid while there's a tethered droid up. So it's just very chaotic, even when you've got an experienced group. So you just do the best you can. The key here is just to survive, so use your defensives aggressively. And it's honestly pretty difficult to kill the droid unless you just totally ignore mechanics altogether. And again, you watch the timer, you just have to survive for 120 seconds. Okay, and then you get to the very, very, very end, which is Izax is about to explode, and there's this massive orange telegraph that covers almost the entire platform. And if you're standing in that orange circle, you'll be killed. So the only safe place to be is to jump on those corner platforms, which are still electrified. So all you do is you run onto the platforms. If you have a really, really strong defensive, like the Sage Sorcerer Force Barrier, the God Bubble, then you can step up there and hit it, and that'll be fine. You have 10 seconds from when the orange circle appears before damage happens. So if you're already near the corner, you can kind of count in your head, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. When you get to about 6 or 7, step up onto the platform and pop your defensives. Now the key here is there is actually a safe spot where you get this warning damage connection buff there at the top that will actually protect you from the damage. So one safe spot to stand on the electrified platform. And if you stand there, then as long as you're careful, you'll get an X over your head and you won't take any damage. But the key here is you just need to survive. After the attack triggers, you stop taking damage from the platforms because they've lost all power. And then as long as one person survives that phase and is still alive after the damage and the screen goes black, then you've won the fight. So let's see this in real time and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so here we go. You can watch the debuff whenever you know it's about to expire. You can just ignore tethers and just move towards these back corners so you have plenty of room. And watch for the big orange circle. There it is. So again, you can count in your head, wait a few seconds like I'm doing, and then I'm going to step up. There I get the big X. Notice I'm not taking any damage. I'm going to pop every single defensive I have anyway, just to be safe. And as long as one person survives, then you win. Here I think just about everybody survived, so we're all good. And then you look around, the platform's destroyed, but you've won. And we'll show it one more time for fun. Anyway, that's the fight. You just have to survive here at the end. It's a really, really long fight. Izax is a lot of fun. I hope this guide has been helpful. I know it's long. Again, hope everyone's been using the navigation to help navigate through the fights. You can revisit as you need to. But anyway, I really love this operation. Best of luck on Gods. Best of luck on Izax. And I think this is fun in story mode. Just wait till you try this in hard mode. It's even more fun then. So thanks so much for watching. If you made it to the end of this gargantuan video, but best of luck. Thanks for watching, and have a good one. Thanks. Bye.